Picture this. It is December 2001. You work at one of the most admired companies in America. Your retirement savings are almost entirely in company stock. Your bosses have been telling you for months that everything is fine. Then, one morning, you wake up and the stock is worthless. Everything is gone. Not because the market crashed, not because a competitor beat you, because the people at the top were lying the whole time. That is the story of Enron. But the real answer is far stranger than a simple lie. Because Enron was not just a fraud, it was a masterpiece. A work of financial fiction so elaborate, so sophisticated, that the people supposed to catch it did not. And the people who built it genuinely believed they were the smartest people in any room they ever walked into. So how does something like this happen? How does a company go from being named Fortune's most innovative company 6 years in a row to filing the largest corporate bankruptcy in American history? The answer says something uncomfortable about ambition, about belief, and about what happens when intelligence completely untethers itself from honesty. Let's go back to the beginning. Enron started as a boring company. In 1985, two gas pipeline companies merged in Houston, Texas. The result was a firm called Enron that moved natural gas through pipes. That was the business. Mundane, physical, real. The company had assets you could touch and revenues you could trace. Nobody was getting rich quick. Nobody was on the cover of magazines. Then Kenneth Lay hired a consultant named Jeffrey Skilling. Skilling had a theory. He believed that energy did not need to be a physical business at all. It could be turned into a financial instrument, traded like stocks and bonds. The pipeline was just the beginning. What if Enron became not just a company that moved gas, but a market that created the price of gas? What if Enron became the middleman for everything? Energy, broadband, water, whatever came next. Lay loved it. Skilling was made CEO. And Enron began to transform. The transformation was dazzling. Enron built trading desks. It hired mathematicians and economists straight out of graduate school. It created something called Enron Online, one of the first major electronic commodity trading platforms in the world. By the late 1990s, traders at Enron were executing billions of dollars worth of transactions every single day. The stock price was soaring. The press called Enron revolutionary. But there was a problem hiding underneath all of that. Enron's trading operations looked profitable. They generated enormous revenues on paper. But much of that revenue was not real cash. It was based on something called mark-to-market accounting, a method that allowed Enron to record the estimated future value of a contract as current profit the moment the contract was signed. Imagine signing a deal today that might pay off in 10 years and immediately booking all of that money as income right now. That is what Enron was doing. The economist Bethany McLean, who was one of the first journalists to publicly question the company's finances in a famous 2001 Fortune article, noticed something simple that almost everyone else had missed. She asked a basic question: how exactly does Enron make its money? Nobody could give her a straight answer. The annual reports were hundreds of pages long and almost completely impossible to understand. The numbers were everywhere. The explanation was nowhere. That opacity was not accidental. It was by design. The architect of Enron's financial concealment was a man named Andrew Fastow, the company's chief financial officer. Fastow created a web of off-balance sheet partnerships, entities with names like LJM and Raptor. These partnerships existed to do one thing: hide Enron's debt and losses from its public financial statements. When a bad investment soured, Enron transferred it to one of Fastow's partnerships. The loss disappeared from the books. The stock price stayed high. Fastow collected tens of millions of dollars in fees for managing these partnerships. The auditing firm Arthur Andersen, one of the most prestigious in the world at the time, signed off on all of it. Later, investigators from the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations found that Andersen had raised concerns internally about Enron's accounting, but never took action publicly. The fees Enron paid to Andersen were too valuable to risk, so the questions were filed away. The audits were approved. Meanwhile, the employees had no idea. Enron ran what it called a rank and yank performance system. Every year, The bottom 15% of performers were fired. The top performers were celebrated, rewarded, handed massive bonuses. The culture was one of relentless competition. Asking questions about whether the numbers were real was not something that fit inside that culture. You either performed or you were gone. The board of directors had been told enough, in vague enough terms, that they could later claim they did not understand what was happening. Research by the sociologist Diane Vaughan, who studied what she called the normalization of deviance in large organizations, describes exactly how this works. Slowly, gradually, a culture accepts behaviors that it would have rejected earlier. Each step is small enough to rationalize. By the time the behavior is catastrophic, it feels completely normal to everyone inside the system. That was Enron. The employees who had their 401ks locked into company stock while the executives exercised their own stock options were not thinking about fraud. They were thinking about the next bonus cycle. The stock price was still climbing. The press was still glowing. The executives were still saying, "Buy more." Then the walls came down. In August 2001, Skilling abruptly resigned, citing personal reasons. The stock began to fall. Analysts started asking harder questions. In October, Enron reported a massive third-quarter loss and announced it was reducing shareholder equity by over $1 billion to account for the partnerships it had been hiding. The SEC launched an investigation. Within weeks, the magnitude of the deception became clear. By December 2, 2001, Enron had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. At the time, it was the largest corporate bankruptcy in American history. 20,000 employees lost their jobs. Many lost their retirement savings entirely. The stock had gone from a high of $90 a share to less than $1. Lay was indicted. Skilling was convicted and sentenced to more than 20 years in prison, later reduced to 14. Fasto pleaded guilty and served 6 years. Arthur Andersen, the auditing firm, was convicted of obstruction of justice and effectively destroyed as a business. But here is the part that stays with you. Here is the part that makes the Enron story more than just a business scandal. None of these men thought they were the villain. Skilling genuinely believed in his vision. He believed that Enron was building something new and necessary, that the accounting methods were legal, that the complexity of the business was simply beyond the understanding of the people criticizing it. He was, in his own mind, misunderstood. Lay, to his death, maintained that he had been deceived by the people beneath him. Fasto, who eventually cooperated with prosecutors and became the most honest of all of them in retrospect, said later that he never stopped to ask whether what he was doing was right because the culture made wrong feel normal. The psychologist Robert Cialdini has written extensively about what he calls social proof, the human tendency to look around at what others are doing and use that as a guide for acceptable behavior. Inside Enron, everyone around you was doing it. The board approved it. The auditors approved it. The banks funded it. The press celebrated it. What was the signal that any of it was wrong? Where was the moment you were supposed to stop? That is the real question the Enron scandal leaves you with. It is not about greed, exactly. Greed is too simple. It is about what happens when a culture stops asking whether something is right and starts asking only whether it works. When the only measure of truth is the stock price. When the only question that matters is whether you are winning. Tonight, when you open your brokerage account, or read a company's earnings report, or hear an executive say that this quarter's numbers are better than expected, a small part of your brain should remember this story. Because the lesson of Enron is not that some people are crooked and some people are honest. The lesson is that intelligence without integrity is the most dangerous force in any organization. And the most admired company in America, the one that 6 years in a row called itself the most innovative, the most forward-thinking, the most brilliant, turned out to be the one that was lying the whole time.